Spiritually Inspired is a sacred space for all people to explore issues of shared concern. Listen to consciously aligned guests and search for spiritual inspiration. Podcast hosts Renee Siri and Jayson Barniske, yoga teachers and authors, explore and find inspiration on the path to enlightenment.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to our podcast. I hope you've had a wonderful day so far, because it's about to get better. So today on the podcast, it's just me. Ronnie's at the Vipassana retreat in Central California. And I was really inspired this week by the work of Swami Rama Tirtha. He was one of the first yogis from India to ever come to the U.S. He lived from 1873 to 1906. And like I said, he was one of the first Hindus to come and ever teach Vedanta yogic philosophy to Americans. He came after Swami Vivekananda, who was the first, and he came before Yogananda, the first Indian who stayed here in the U.S. And I found out about Swami Rama Tirtha because during the New Year's meditation that we always do at the Self-Realization Fellowship, one of the songs we sang was Swami Rama Tirtha's song. And it's a beautiful song. I'm sure you can find it on YouTube if you look it up. But Yogananda was really inspired by Swami Ram and translated a lot of his poems into English and shared them with his students. So today's podcast is titled Finding Happiness Within. And a lot of times in the West, we look externally, we look towards material things to find happiness. And that happiness is short-lived. Really, I encourage people to search for long-term pleasure instead of short-term happiness, which usually becomes long-term pain. Everyone searches for happiness. This is what Swami Rama taught, that it was one of the main goals in life. He even compared different countries because nations themselves go through periods of spiritual development. Here in the West, America is a younger country, a little bit older than us, or some of the European countries like England and France. And a much older country would be India or China. And if you look at these countries and what's important to them, it's a little bit different. So the U.S. has not been around very long, and our society, our culture has not been around for long. So our society tends to seek towards material things for pleasure and to find happiness in very temporary moments of pleasure. In Europe, the society is a little bit older, so they begin to value their culture. They begin to value family and connection a little bit more than we do in the U.S. And much older are societies like China or India. And they've gone through the same patterns that we have of searching for material happiness. And then searching for more happiness outside through other people, through connection. And then they're at a deeper stage of happiness and really tuning into spirituality within. If you ever go to a third world country, you'll see sometimes that people are very happy there, even though there's great levels of suffering. And they don't have a lot of material stuff. Sometimes it just seems that the people in these third world countries that have been around for a long time are a lot happier than we are in first world countries. And we have more stuff than they do. But for some reason, it seems that they're happier. So he talked about the spiritual development of a nation. And as our nation is still developing, I encourage spiritual teachers like yourself and leaders to encourage people to dive deep in really what makes them happy. And that's what we're doing in this podcast today. So Swami Rama, it was a really interesting discourse of his that I read. He talks about 6 stages of happiness that everyone goes through. Quite interesting when a child is first born. They don't know yet about money or material possessions or clothes or anything like that. All they really care about is their mother, pulling on their mother's skirt, getting the milk from their mother, that connection to their mother, attention from the mother. Because the parent really is their only basic means of survival, and that's all they know. And little by little, they begin to grow older, and children are very perceptive, watching everything that their parents do, and maybe even that their siblings do. And so after a little while, maybe 2 or 3 years, they switch to the second stage of happiness, and that's usually in their toys and material stuff. And so that's usually when they begin to develop this sense of I, me, or mine. And it's beautiful to see young children, like just babies that are fresh arrived from the source, from the other side. And they have this incredible purity in them. But once they get to that stage of toys, and they talk about the terrible twos, there's this little shift, and they've begun to develop that sense of ego that says, these are my things, and they're not yours. This is mine. So after a little while, once that child develops a little bit more, they get into the third stage, the development of happiness and the understanding of what gives them happiness. The third thing that they start to look towards is like books or stories. And in our society more now, it may be video games or technology or movies, Netflix. Remember, Swami Rama was around in the early 1900s, so they didn't necessarily have access to Netflix. But I've been around young children, and it's really interesting to see how they're, well, just like adults, so totally captivated by iPhones, or so totally captivated by being on a tablet, or become almost like zombie-like watching a TV. And that's where they really understand their source of happiness exists, is in their toys, is in their entertainment. So the second stage of that, this third stage, I guess it's 2 parts. As a child grows a little bit older, maybe in high school or even college, they really value their books and their education and their intellect and their own, I guess you could say, like their medals or their awards or the recognition that they receive. A lot of times a child may get it, or a teenager or young adult may get it through sports or through academic recognition, getting a high score on their SATs or becoming the top of their class. And that's where they begin to find their source of happiness. And again, this may vary from person to person, and again, a little bit more in our society. Maybe they get it in a girlfriend, or maybe they get it riding motorcycles or jet skis, or whatever their source of happiness gets. The whole point of this thing is we kind of go through stages of development in our understanding of where happiness exists. So after college, and after this deeper understanding, this deeper intellect has been cultivated, the young adult starts to be able to earn a living, starts to be able to make some money and provide for themselves. So the fourth stage of happiness would be in money. And this younger adult begins to cultivate money, begins to really prize money, begins to see that money is not the root of all evil, but the young adult sees that money is the source of their happiness, and this is what can give them freedom in life. So it's really interesting how you see the young adults in our society really prize money, and money's the most important thing. So once that young adult is financially stable, they may have a nice house, they may have the nice car, and these are all derivatives of making money. Then they start to want the woman or the man in their life. They want to get married. So yes, it's great. Then awesome, they get married. In India, it's called the householder life. And they find their partner, and they look in their partner, and they're very happy with him for a time. Maybe after a few years, their happiness starts to shift to something else, and they want to desire a child, because what does any married couple want to do? So the last stage, the sixth stage of happiness, is in a child, creating a family. you've seen the face, or maybe you've experienced it yourself, the face of a brand new parent and the awe that they're in, the beauty of their child. It's described by many as like the greatest joy you could experience in life. But so interesting, as the child grows up, then the source of this happiness begins to shift. Maybe it goes back to the partner. Maybe it goes to money. Maybe it goes to their education. Maybe it goes towards comfort from their parents. So we have the six stages of happiness: the child for their mother, the toys, entertainment, and the fourth is money, and the fifth is marriage, and the sixth is a child or family. The real point that Swami Ram taught here was that happiness is never still. It's always moving, and it goes from object to object. The happiness that our senses experience is almost impossible to capture. The Bhagavad Gita describes controlling the senses is as difficult as lassoing the wind. So how interesting. And Swami Rama describes happiness like the sunshine. It travels from place to place. You know, like if the sunshine is on the US right now, and in a few hours it's going to be over the Pacific Ocean, then Hawaii, then Japan and Japan and India, and moves over the Middle East, and eventually to Europe, and always back around. So the sunshine's always moving. It's never still. But where is its source? Think about that for a little while. This is a pretty powerful analogy. The source of the sunshine is not in the world. The source of the sunshine is the sun. So like in our own lives, the source of our happiness is not the external world, but it's in the light within ourselves. It's in our true source. So Swami Ram gives some very challenging stories that he uses as metaphors for us to understand happiness. And so bear with me through some of these stories. They might trigger you or bring up some interesting feelings, but these stories kind of help me to understand a little bit more clearly the source of happiness. There's a story about a man who was working in his office, and he just got this phone call, and this phone call sent him into an absolute panic. Right then and there, a man walks into his office, and he said, "Remember that lottery ticket that we bought together last week? Well, we won, and you have $10,000. But the man was still very upset with the phone call that he had just received. And the money didn't matter anything to him because he was so distraught. So obviously the money can't be his source of happiness. He ran outside and he had to go somewhere very quickly because of this phone call. And a taxi came up. And he jumped in the taxi, and right in front of him was sitting the chief executive of the office where he worked in. And he'd been waiting to talk to this man for a very long time because he could share some of his ideas about the company and how to make it grow, potentially even getting himself a promotion. But at that moment, the boss in front of him, he was still panic-stricken. And he was still going a little crazy in the mind. So obviously, the success of his career could not be the source of his happiness. And so I won't keep you waiting for much longer at what this phone call was all about. So when he was in the office, he received his phone call. The phone call was about his house being on fire. All of his family was there. His child was there. The housekeeper was there. So he rushed home as quickly as he could. So obviously, the family and the child, the home, were much more important than money and the career to this man, right? So he rushes home, and he gets home, and all of his family's there. His mother, his father, his wife, even the housekeeper was there. But they realized that everyone had rushed out of the house in such a hurry, the child had been left in the home. Oh no, the fire department showed up, and this man went to them pleading. He wasn't willing to go himself, but he was pleading to the fire department. Please, I'll give you everything, all the money that I had. I'll give you all the money I make in the next 10 years if you go in the home and rescue my child. But the house was in such a flame that nobody was willing to go inside. The child, most likely, was not alive any longer. And I know this is a difficult part of the story to apprehend, but the child can't be the source of happiness for this man. Because for him to go in the house and rescue the child himself, he would be sacrificing his own self, his source of happiness. So it's an interesting way to look at it. But the biggest fear is to sacrifice your own source of happiness. And so, again, if he wouldn't go in the house to rescue the child couldn't be a source of happiness. And the wife, the parents, the firefighters, no one was willing to go in the house, which really proves that their source of happiness was within themselves. There's another interesting analogy. And again, these are kind of difficult. But take a look at them and think about that. Because this whole podcast is about where is the source of our happiness. Okay, so this is, again, a tough one. But is the source of our happiness in our feet? If most people were given the choice to lose either their hands or their feet, what would they choose? If you could only keep your hands or only keep your feet, what would you choose? Most people would probably keep their hands because you do so much with your hands. There's other ways to get around, a wheelchair, whatever it may be. So the hands must be closer to our true source of happiness, right? Would they be willing to give up their hands or their nose? Let's think about that for a little bit. And let's say just maybe they're willing to give up their hands before their nose. What about their nose over their eyes? Person would probably give up their nose before they'd be giving up their eyes, and they wouldn't even be able to see the world. These things that you see in the world are what give you happiness, right? Or what about the eyes over the actual body itself? Most people would probably take the eyes before they give up their body. What about the body over the intellect? Would you be in a nearly comatose body but have your intellect? These are very tough decisions to even consider. What about your own intellect versus life itself? Not all people, but most people would, many people, I can't speak for you. It would be really even difficult to say what I would do to myself in this decision, but would I be willing to give up my intellect or my life itself first? And so in the life, we have like prana or chi. We have the actual life force energy. And so when life is lost itself, then what is there? In Christianity, they call it the Holy Ghost. In New Age spirituality, they may call it the Source. In other traditions, they may call it Spirit, the soul, the higher self. But even without the physical body, even without our own life, we still have our spirit, our source, our soul, our highest self exists. So this must be the source of happiness. All right? And why is it the feet, the hands, the nose, the eyes, the body, the intellect? Well, Swami Ram suggests that the source of our happiness is in our third eye, is in our highest self. So in that highest self must be the source of our happiness, where we truly are. We often look at a child, and that's the highest level of happiness that man can recognize in his own life. And because in his child, he sees his highest self. Because again, as I said before, the child has just came from source. The child had just come from the other side, from other dimensions into this reality. So the parent sees their own highest self in their child. This is like the same if you write your own book or you make your own hypothesis on some great work that you do. That is going to be the greatest work in the world. Even greater to you than the work of some master, some Einstein or Tesla. Why? Because that's a reflection of your own highest self. So our highest self, our source, who we really are, that is where our happiness exists. The things we love most in the physical world really just represent our own shadow in this world. Why would we seek our own self in our shadow? The source is within you. Why would we look outside? Why would we look in the physical world outside of ourselves for ourself, for happiness? It's kind of an interesting proposition. I remember this great quote that we are the stars looking back at themselves. And I've always meditated deeply on what that means. And until I heard this, read the work of Swami Rama, I didn't understand. But the material world, the world we see around us, is just a reflection of our internal world. Again, this is why meditation is so powerful, because when we begin to look within, when we begin to see who we really are and change our internal environment, our external environment changes. How many of you have been very stressed out and went to a yoga class or were able to sit in meditation, and then after, then you were able to slow down and see how beautiful the world was all around you? I've had that experience many times myself. And the magic of meditation or yoga or any spiritual practice is, it does help you slow down a little bit and then identify with the source of who you really are. And that's where happiness exists. Another interesting story. A woman lost a needle in her house. And the woman was very, very poor. She was so poor she couldn't even afford a light in her house. So she went outside to search for the needle that she lost in her house, because the street had a light, right? So a man saw her, was like looking around everywhere under the street light. And he asked her what she was doing. She said, "I'm searching for the needle that I lost." And he asked her where she lost it. And she said, inside her house. And the man couldn't understand. Why would you be searching outside when the light is inside your house? And she said, well, because the light is outside. I don't have a light inside, so I'll look outside and maybe I'll find it here. And this is the way most people are. Because their awareness is focused on the external world, they look in the external world for happiness, when true happiness only exists within. So Yogananda says in his meditations, turn the searchlight of your awareness from the outside in. Now that is what meditation is. It's when we begin to turn the searchlight of our awareness from the external world to the internal world. This is heavy. Think about that for a moment. When we realize heaven exists within ourselves, we stop searching for it outside. And that's when suffering ends. Jesus Christ said that the kingdom of heaven is within you. It's not in the external world. Now, I'm not saying that you can't enjoy the comforts of life. I'm not saying that you can't have a nice car or a nice home or provide for your family. All I want you to do is begin to identify with the greater source of happiness than you can ever derive from the material world. It comes from within. So that was very heavy Vedantic philosophy. the real source of happiness. I want to give everyone a short meditation that I created. It's called the Peace Meditation. And it may begin to help you cut through some of those layers of that onion of the self and get to the core. So sitting up straight, and again, probably not best if you're driving when you do this. Maybe just if you're driving, pause, and you can share when you get home. So close your eyes and begin to tune into your breathing. Just take a few breaths, inhales and exhales. Just focus on your breathing. If your mind begins to wander, just bring your awareness back to your breath. I want you to recall a time, an experience when you felt joy. Just the first one that pops to your head. Remember the details, when it was, who was there, what happened. And then let go of the experience and just stick with the feeling, the energetic vibration, what joy feels like at its source. Now let's begin to transform that joy into happiness. So I want you to recall a time when you experienced happiness. Recall the location, who was there, what was going on. Remember all the details of the experience. Now let go of the experience and just sit with the feeling, with the energy, with that source of happiness. So moving even deeper towards the source. Let's transform that happiness into contentment. Recall a time in your life where you felt deep contentment. Who was there? Was it just you? Where were you? What was going on? Remember the details. Now let go of the experience and just sit with the feeling itself. the feeling of contentment. Getting all the way to the core, to the source. We're going to transform that contentment into peace. So I want you to recall a time in your life where you felt the most peaceful, the deepest experience of peace that you had. Think about the details of that experience. First one that comes to mind. Now let go of the experience and let's just sit with the energy, the vibration, this deep source of peace. And now we're going to start coming back from peace to the feeling of contentment. From contentment to happiness. From happiness to joy. From joy, come back into your body. Begin to focus on your breathing again, just inhaling and exhaling. Take 3 deep breaths. Slowly blink your eyes open. So just check in really quickly how you feel now versus how you felt before that meditation. It's quite interesting how joy is so light. And happiness is light, but not as light as joy. Contentment is more full. And peace to me almost seems very heavy. We all have the ability to tune into joy, happiness, or peace, just like tuning the dial on a radio. And it happens by going inwards. Because like I said before, when we change our internal world, it's the quickest way to change the world outside of us. So I'm very grateful that you tuned in and listened to this podcast. I really encourage you to dive deep in search of your own happiness. Create more peace in your life with meditation. If you'd like to see the speech that Swami Rama Tirtha gave, you can find it on YouTube. Ronnie will be back in a week or so from her retreat, and we'll do an amazing podcast on her experience. So thank you very much for tuning in, and I'll see you guys soon. If you like the podcast, please comment in the box below and subscribe to our channel, whether it's Podbean or iTunes or Facebook. And also we have a YouTube channel that you can subscribe to. I want to say a big thank you to our sponsor, 5D Minerals. Every single product they sell directly goes to helping us support our work doing this podcast. So please check them out at 5dminerals.com.
Thank you everyone for tuning in, and let's stay inspired together.